had many challenges for us. Obviously, COVID affected us in a very direct way. We had 15 players that tested positive, 8 staff members. We played 11 doubleheaders. From July 24th on, we had 151 transactions, and we had 13 major league debuts. So overall, just extremely proud of the group of players, and a real sincere thank you to Mike Schilt and his staff, our medical team, our clubhouse staff, and our front office team. This entire group showed patience and empathy with each other and throughout the season. The 2020 season is now complete, and I would like to touch on a few things before we throw it to questions. First off, Colton Wong, his option will not be exercised. I spoke with Colton this afternoon. I told him that some of the uncertainties, we're just not in a position to do that. We both agreed to keep the door open. And so as we progress in this, it's something that we're not ruling out for future return. Both Yadier Molina and Adam Wainwright are both now free agents. I have touched base with both their agents going prior to this, and obviously, it's going to be continued dialogue to see if there's a way to retain both of them or one of them as the offseason unfolds. But talking about the offseason, it's really difficult to plan when you have a lot of uncertainties. And right now, we don't know what our revenues are going to look like next year. We don't understand what attendance will look like next year. Candidly, we don't even know exactly what the rules might be for next year. We don't know exactly what the rosters might look like yet next year in terms of numbers. As you know, this year we played with 28 instead of 26. And of course, dates, there's still some question marks. So planning will be a challenge this year. And one of the things that, we all are going to need is clarity on this. And so hopefully as we enter the off season, that's something that we will all gain. Randy Arozarena, I'm sure none of you were going to ask me about this. Obviously, after a 50-game season, our offense was not consistent in its performance. And clearly, when you looked at what Randy did this year and specifically what he did in the postseason, it was incredible. Needless to say, he took advantage of this opportunity, took advantage of his playing time. And what does that mean for us? I see this as an opportunity for us to revisit our own internal evaluation methods. Clearly, when I look back at when we made that deal, obviously we were making this trade for our future. We were looking at trading for somebody that could eventually be in our rotation and be a contributing member. But when you look at our offensive struggles, it's a fair question to ask, well, why him and not someone else? And so I will own that. That's on me. And I certainly have always said that you always have to know your own players better than players outside your organization, because if you get that wrong, you have a problem. And that's why we will take that opportunity and revisit how we rank our own players and make sure we don't have something like this happen again. I want to touch on staffing. Earlier in the week, it was announced that our entire staff is coming back. And for the most part, I feel people thought that was good news. But there were a lot of questions concerning our hitting coach, specifically Jeff Albert. And, I just want to remind everybody that when we hired Jeff, it was for him to help create a real top-down approach in our methodology. And I really feel like he's done an excellent job doing that. Obviously, when you're taking a group of major league hitters and putting him with a new coach, there's going to be a learning curve. But one of the things that Jeff has accomplished is he's really built up our minor league staff. We've had additions of Russ Steinhorn, Daniel Nicholson, and Joey Hawkins. And these are all young, talented hitting coaches that are making a difference. And so, when you think about these types of changes in your system, they do have to have a more organic feel. So as players progress up through the system, when they do get to the big leagues, they now know what that normal looks like. And so I really have a lot of confidence in what Jeff's doing and what this team is doing. And you know, Elke and Jobal are buying into it, and they understand what's expected. So, overall, I feel like they're going down the path that we envisioned. But again, it's something that we understand will take time. Finally, the roster. After this very odd and strange year we've been through, we've learned some things, and we still have some questions. And I would imagine that that's going to create for a lot of hot stove conversation over what we should do, or what we will do, or what we can do over the next 3 or 4 months. And I think the strength of this team going into next year is still going to be our pitching. We have a lot of depth for our rotation. I think our everyday club, it may look a little different. It just depends on what happens with our own internal free agents. And then as far as the outfield goes, clearly we've got to find consistency in offensive production. And it's likely, as of we sit right now, giving Tommy Edman a chance at second. But, again, not speaking in absolutes, not saying anything's for sure. But as we approach this offseason, it's definitely going to require some creativity, some patience, and good timing. And for that, I ask you all to stay tuned. And at this time, I will open it up to questions. Thank you.
Mo, when you look at the team as it lays out now, obviously a lot of things can change. Do you look at an offensive upgrade as a priority for you guys?
It's hard to say. In terms of how we're going to approach the market or the trade market, it just depends on what we think we're getting back in return. But as we sit here today, I know we'll have some changes. There'll be some decisions that we have to make, but don't have a complete roadmap because, again, there's a lot of uncertainty in this offseason, and it's hard to lay out a specific strategy on October 28th when there's a lot of question marks that still don't have answers.
Mo, to follow up on that question, you mentioned in September at the trade deadline that you would evaluate the performance of the outfield through the rest of the year and determine if you needed to go external. Do you think that the outfield is, in fact, an area that you'll look to go external for help?
Again, I don't know. I think everybody wants me to say yes to that question, and that's why you're asking it. I feel like, again, this was a very difficult season to make judgments. We had 15 players that tested positive for COVID. I think as we look back on that, we have learned a lot about how COVID affects people. And I do think it had a negative effect on performance. And, it's difficult for a medical staff dealing with so many unknowns on that regard to understand how to best help. And I think some of the transparency, even from players, on what they were dealing with was something new to them as well. So it's again, a hard thing to answer because we didn't play perhaps the most normal 58 game season where others may have. Not using that as an excuse. I am using that as a reason for pause.
Mo, has there been a directive from the ownership level to decrease payroll for 2021 below the 2020 level?
Well, clearly revenues are going down, Jeff. So it will be most likely where payroll will go down. So adjusting to what that looks like, we haven't determined because we don't know what revenues look like for next year.
Do you think you'll be able to make a model of that, Mo? Because, if you don't know until after the off season's over, isn't it difficult to sort of operate under those parameters, not knowing whether there's going to be
we're modeling now. We have a lot of different scenarios we're looking at, but that I think is part of the challenge of the offseason.
And how much was the Colton decision motivated by what you just mentioned, that payroll could have to come down given, the circumstances?
It's just immediate flexibility, whereas if we committed to it and then all of a sudden we realized we were in a more difficult spot, then what are we left to try to do? And, you know, again, not having a ton of time to explore the trade market or know what that looks like. And, you know, candidly, it was just the, you know, very conservative and safer play at the moment.
Mo, do you have the sense that other teams are obviously in your same spot? Revenue was not available almost everywhere. Well, everywhere, because they weren't tickets sold. So is this in some ways having to read the market as well, that it could be a while before any team spends?
I don't think everybody's in exactly the same spot we are. Obviously, the success of the Cardinals in terms of the last 20 years has been our gate revenue. And so I do think like we might be more negatively affected than others. I also think when you look at sort of how we've always sort of built this roster where it's almost been this perpetual consistency of our core players, giving younger players opportunity, and then, you know, backfilling wherever we felt we had a specific need. The one thing that we did not plan for was a pandemic and a year like we just experienced. And so from a payroll standpoint, we're already starting at a pretty high number.
So like from 2019 standards, Wong's option is rather team friendly, given what he's meant to you and what he's done for the team. So if, I mean, I guess if I'm wrong about that, then say so. But if I'm right about that, then what does that say about?
I don't think I want to get into whether it was friendly or not. I mean, that's then commentary on a awkward 58 game season. But I would say that what I said to Mark was that, you know, we have very few options to create flexibility. And I don't think it's going to be the normal year either to say, hey, I'm just going to try to trade a player or two to find a way to reduce payroll. I think it's going to be a much different landscape, and just trying to create instant flexibility was all we were trying to do. I
guess, does it change then the exchange rate that you have to expect if you go outside? In other words, like if you want to create financial flexibility by not exercising this roster, which we all know what it's worth, but does that say anything about what kind of spending you could do in the open market?
No. We don't, first off, we don't know what the market's going to look like yet. We will obviously pay attention to where we think it's headed or going, but really this is just trying to mitigate costs as best we can until we have a sense of where we're going. We don't have a ton of flexibility to do so. You know, I think if everybody could start at zero, they would right now, just given the uncertainty, but that's not an option.
Hey, Mo, when you mentioned that you think, you know, just naturally payroll obviously will have to adjust to less revenue, can you give us any sense of parameters you've given in terms of scale? You know, typically your payroll's in that 150, 160 range. Have you been directed that it's got to go down X percentage, or can you give us any idea of what that might look like?
There's no direction like that. I mean, obviously, Mr. DeWitt and I, we speak every day. We're very in tune to what's happening. It's when you go from having 3.3 or 3.4 million fans in your ballpark to having zero, it's a big hit. And you know, you have certain operating expenses that just don't go away. And obviously, when you have fixed commitments and contracts, those are not going away. And so, you know, obviously we're trying to figure out like how we can best forecast revenues for next year. And then hopefully we can react in a positive way to help improve this club.
Hey, Mo, when you started those conversations with Tampa last year, obviously when a guy like Liberatore is made available, you're really interested. But was Tampa Bay, were they focused on Arozarena, or were there other names that might have been discussed besides Martinez and Arozarena in that trade?
Yeah, I've never actually reopened my notes on that trade, but I do believe that there were other names being tossed about.
Mo, does the financial uncertainty you're operating under disincentivize perhaps exploring the free agent market in Asia, Korea, for example, where you'd have to pay a posting fee on top of what a contract might look like?
Always hate these kind of questions, Jeff. So I'll call you out on that to the group, but the answer is no, of course, because why would I say it's punitive if I don't even know what it is? And so I think looking at that market and if there's something that makes sense to us that we feel is of value, then we could perhaps pursue it. So that's how I'd like to think about those types of questions.
Mo, can you give us a sense of the bandwidth you guys are operating under when you do talk about scenarios? Does it include, I would imagine often it includes not having fans, then having limited fans, then having a full stadium, which everybody hopes for. But does it also include different sizes of seasons?
Yeah, it does. And I don't want to get in specifics because I don't want to be like somewhere creating rumors or a false sense of what may or may not happen. The answer is we don't know what it looks like. And so from a planning standpoint, World Series ended last night. COVID still exists in our country. It's real. And once there is an opportunity for a vaccine, could that help, create more opportunities? Of course. But, there's a lot of uncertainty. But right now, the baseball schedule is not changing. In other words, free agents were declared last night at midnight. We're touching base with the responsibilities that we have in the short term. But, clearly as the off season unfolds, I would imagine it's going to have a different feel or pace than maybe many of you are used to, as well as myself. But, time will tell.
Well, if you would start 2021 with a group of position players, you have O'Neill, Bader, Fowler, Carlson, Carpenter, DeYoung, Edmund, Goldie. What's your comfort level with those guys getting better in 2021?
Fair question. And that's something that I think from an internal standpoint, we're looking at in terms of like, your question was almost like, what's my confidence level that they will get better? I'd say very low without a strategy. And so what I mean by that is like, is there something that we've identified that individuals can do to improve their offensive performance? And I will say I do have confidence in Jeff and his team to go through that exercise. I do feel like Bader is an example of that improvement, candidly. When you look at what he did this past year, we saw improvements in things that maybe just don't scream to the average fan, but there were improvements. And still hitting the ball very hard, which this league has value in. I would also say a guy like O'Neill, walk rate went up, strikeout rate went down, and that's encouraging. Now, is it to the point where we as a group are confident that can still be successful at the major league level, competing in a division with great pitching and so forth? So fair question. Don't have a perfect answer for you, Randy, but I mean, that's what we're trying to internally decide.
Mo, I can't remember if this is a phrase that you've used with us or if it was with the ownership group a couple of years ago, but you said that the Cardinals are always with the pedal down when it comes to contending. Do you have to discuss taking a step back from that model, from that brand, and maybe rethink if this is the year to not contend?
Boy, that's a tough message to send to somebody.
Yeah, I know.
So the answer would be no. I think you're the one that likes to talk about like winning windows or having opportunities at times to best know when to go get it or go chase it. And I do think, given where we are, depending on how some of the things unfold this offseason, might dictate whether we decide to chase something or not. We do have some flexibility coming off the books in 2022. So, again, not wedded to any one strategy at this point, but I still feel like this team can be good. But perhaps your question is good enough? And I think in time we'll know.
I mean, to be fair, I ask about windows because you often push back, and that makes for a better quote.
Yeah, I like to push back on that because that's why I like to always compete.
Right. But my job is not to wow you with my question. It's to get you to give me a good answer. So that's why I ask about windows.
Well, hopefully that's acceptable.
The end is, yeah.
Mo,
Mo, did you
related
decide-
to Randy's question, is the organization comfortable with Andrew Kisner as an everyday catcher in the big leagues at this point in his career, if it were to come to that?
Well, I think I would definitely like to see Andrew get more opportunity. 17 at bats this year. It's hard to make a lot of decisions on that, but whatever we do, obviously there could be another face in the mix. But as I stated, until we determine what's going to actually happen with our free agents, it's hard to sort of state what's next. So speaking in hypotheticals, I think I will kick that can down the road. Ann?
Yeah, hey Mo. I was curious a little bit, you were talking about earlier, how do you go about evaluating this season? What things do you look at to sort of balance what you went through while also, having to evaluate the actual on-field performance?
Well, I assure you, we're taking a deep dive into all of that, and we'll use all the tools that are available to us, whether that's from an analytical slant to getting coaches' opinions of where we are. I know Schulte and his staff are already beginning this process, and ultimately we have some time. I mean, we don't have to make these decisions tomorrow, and so we'll use this to best evaluate where we are and see where we can possibly have some upgrades.
Hey, Mo, before the decision was made about Colton, was there some discussions about maybe seeing if there was any interest in taking a little bit lower salary for next year and adding to the deal, for a couple future years?
I didn't go down the path to try to negotiate that at this time, but that's not something we're ruling out for future discussions.
Oh, I don't even know if this is a thing anymore, but do you have any exclusive window to negotiate with Yachty and Wainwright, or is that a former? I think that used to be a rule.
There's still 5 days of like the close period. I do plan on touching base with their agents this week at some point, but I imagine when you get this close to market, you go to market.
Okay, so you're sort of anticipating they would want to find out what other teams think about them, and that you could potentially have some competition there.
Perhaps, yes.
Say, Mo, if you got a feel for when you might find out if you're dealing with the DH league next year in your league or not?
That was my part about rules when I mentioned that earlier, and the answer is I don't know. And so, as you start to approach the offseason, that's an interesting question and one that you'd like to be prepared for. So my guess is we'll be sort of going through those GM type meetings next week. They're virtual, of course, and they're more sort of one-on-one, but I imagine after those are concluded, we should have some sense of directionally where a lot of my questions might be answered. So, like I've told my team that let's give it a couple weeks, and then, we'll have a better understanding of maybe how to think through some things by mid-November.
Mo, just so I'm clear on where you guys are with Colton, obviously you said you guys will leave the door open. I understand your reasoning for this. Do you think that that's a reasonable possibility that you guys do work something out? I'm just trying to figure out where you guys are with Colton. It's not definitely shutting the door.
I don't know how to answer that, Jim. I answered it as true as I can say. In terms of trying to handicap what's next for him, I don't know.
Well, have you guys made any plans with
Derek?
Oh, sorry. Have you guys made any plans with instructional league? Some teams have been able to start that up, their development program. You guys have been one of the teams that didn't do it, but that's not unusual because you've done it in January before.
That's correct. Yeah, we had no intentions of doing it at this point. We are still considering a potential hitting camp at some point, but no dates have been set. And I think given where we are in COVID, and until we sort of have a better understanding of potentially how we could test, I would guess earliest might be something in December, but more likely January.
Does this put a heavy emphasis then on your performance department to provide individual off-season workouts that guys can do so that it's not, what would it be, 10 months without kind of a development structure then, or without a baseball for some of these younger guys?
Yeah, I think The good news is we already have that infrastructure set up. And so that's just sort of carryover that what we've already had in place from last year. So nothing really changes in that regard. And, you know, for the most part, there's been that bi-monthly conversation with players. And so I feel like from that standpoint, you know, the ball's rolling down the hill already. So we're in a good spot there. It's not to say we might not have a performance camp as well at some point, but you know, just trying to understand numbers and you know, pandemic's still going on. So like, you know, we can't just simply say it's not, and we're going to open things up. Rather,
I think you can say that. It's been said.
Okay, well, I won't. How about that?
Hey, Mo, you've obviously had to negotiate with an iconic Cardinal free agent before in Albert. Can you give us an idea of the balance that you have to find between the nostalgia of a guy who's been so important for your franchise, but who he's 38. He's not a 30 or a 29-year-old guy anymore financially, and in terms of how you build your team. How do you find that balance to find the right sweet spot to sign a guy like that?
Well, it's probably one of the more difficult types of negotiations because, look, I've known Yachty since he was drafted. You know, he's been a iconic figure to this organization. And so, like, you know, I could tell you how tough I am and what a great negotiator I am, but like, I'm human, and there are parts of your decision making that will inherently be drawn to that relationship. And, you know, ultimately, I think in this particular case, it's about trying to understand really about next year, trying to recognize his legacy and what it means to this organization, but also understanding that this is still a business and there are some tough decisions that have to be made, but they're not fun. I mean, it's just something when you're agonizing over these types of things, it's difficult. And you know, I'd be lying to you if I said it was easy, and I'd be lying to you if I said it doesn't, you know, keep you up at night.
Mo, in past years, you've sometimes looking at young potential future core players and, you know, trying to get greater cost certainty in out years by longer term commitments. Do you think, given the current challenging environment you're in, you're less likely to look at those types of deals this winter than maybe before?
Well, the reason it's difficult right now, I'm not going to answer yes or no yet because like, we really haven't taken a deep dive into that. But you know, it's sort of like pre and post COVID, right? It's like there's a pre-COVID market, and you know, people that signed and did deals before that probably benefit, and then there's a post-COVID market that has some uncertainty and probably a larger delta on what that looks like. And so I think, you know, it's hard to say with certainty like exactly how we should value that, because a lot of the modeling we do is based on sort of like total dollars spent on payroll in baseball, and then, you know, try to reverse engineer what our market size should be paying for it. And so I would say the error bars on this are trickier.
Hey, Mo, going back to the DH just briefly, if that is enacted again for next year, does that make your task of adding some slugging to this lineup easier? Because, you know, given some financial constraints, given that you don't have to find a two-way player, you only have to find a one-way player.
I do think identifying a player that is specifically a hitter versus having to play a position does ease that search, but that becomes more of a timing issue too, right? Like if once the green light's set for DH, then it's like how many teams are already organized for something like that versus a club like us that might be looking for some extra offense. It may be a little bit more seamless, but we'll see.
To extend that question, what about the idea of a platoon player, particularly who's particularly efficient against one type of pitching versus another?
Yeah, again, like I look at rosters as you're the sum of your parts. You know, whether that's a payroll issue or a talent issue. And so if you're comfortable or confident with the platoon model, then you should welcome it. So to answer your question, I'd certainly be open-minded to that.
Mo, we saw that Eduardo Sanchez had a surgery that appeared to be Tommy John. I don't know if we ever got an official announcement on that. Are there any further medical updates from the end of the season? Anybody else have procedures, and was that in fact what he had?
Medical question. didn't see those coming today. He did have Tommy John, yes. Dr. Paletta did do the procedure, and I believe that was 2 weeks ago. Paul Goldschmidt had a bone spur taken out of his right elbow, and he is progressing very well. I saw him earlier in the week, and he feels good. I think.
Update on Carlos by chance?
Say that again?
Update on Carlos by chance?
Carlos did not have a procedure that I'm aware of.
I'm asking, like he last we saw him, he had the oblique strain. He'd gone home.
Right, I just back home healing.
Hey, Mo, in addition to the internal evaluation that you're going to take a look at, Fernando Tatis Sr. talked about how much the Cardinals looked at Fernando Tatis Jr. Is that another aspect, the scouting, especially of young international players, that you would want to take a look at?
You know, hindsight's 2020, right? And you know, I think when you go back and start to drill down on everything that might be perceived as a miss versus getting, I think that can be a little dangerous. I think understanding your processes and why you make decisions is a little bit more interesting to me. So, you know, you have more confidence in the future. I mean, obviously you're looking at what Mr. Tatis is doing currently. And yes, someone had picked up the phone and asked me for an extra $100,000. Would I have said yes? Knowing what I know today? Of course. But, you know, those decisions aren't made, they're made in time, and you see what you see. And so, you know, in fairness to the individuals that were making those decisions at the time, I think they felt like they were being aggressive, and they you know, felt they were putting their best foot forward. So I'm focusing more on sort of what we already have when I made that statement, Randy. And but I do feel like from an overall production standpoint, given the fact that many players currently playing in the big leagues were once signed or drafted by the Cardinals, I think you guys should have confidence we're pretty good at that. But I'm not here to pat ourselves on the back. It's go ahead, D.
Yeah, actually, that leads into like an interesting topic. You know, you guys have populated other pitching staffs, and then you did obviously identify what kind of hitter Ozuna was for the Marlins, and then was for the Braves this year, and he struggled with you guys for health reasons in part. What role does, when you evaluate players and you rank them, as you said, what role does the development aspect of it play in where you maximize their ability? Because we hear a lot about how opportunity is a part of that, but it does seem like that there's a next level to that it's finding how to bring out the best performance from a guy and not seeing it happen elsewhere.
Yeah, I think for the most part, ours is the inability to create that opportunity. But having said that, there are players that have played here and then have gone on to perform at a higher level elsewhere. I would caution people to not overreact on a 60-game schedule versus a 162 to draw any conclusions. I'm not taking anything away from what Mr. Ozuna did this year. He was a dynamic. But I mean, you can take clips of 60 games of other players during a portion of a 162 and come up with similar numbers, but it wasn't sustained on either the front end or the back end. So, but clearly when you're looking at what players are doing when they're no longer with you, yeah, I think it's a fair question to try to understand like what they're doing differently, or is there something from whether it's in the training room to the weight room, the batting cage, or the bullpen. But yeah, I mean, we all want to ask questions and understand why, because I mean, look, we'd all love to bat 1,000, but clearly in our decision making, we always don't. And wherever we can improve upon a process or how we make decisions, we certainly welcome.
Hey, Mo, how hard was it for you to tell Cardinal Hall of Famers like Carpenter and Izzy that you wouldn't be able to afford having them do what they do for you this coming year?
Well, those are always tough conversations, but you know, in fairness, when you're looking at sort of where people are. I mean, like, look, one of our mantras this coming year is going to be, we're going to do less with more. And so people that are working every day, you know, are going to be tasked with that. But, you know, when you're in a financial climate that we're in, under a pandemic, sometimes you have to make these difficult decisions, and you know those aren't easy calls. But you know, currently the group that we still have employed that are working are energized, and you know, I didn't close any doors with those gentlemen. And you know, if things become more optimistic as we start to move to the season or in season, they're a phone call away. Maybe they don't take my phone call, but that's.
Did you get a sense with your alternate camp? Did guys get closer to the major league level? Guys like Gorman and Liberatore and some of the other Montero people that were down there. Was that helpful in getting those guys closer to here for 2022, perhaps?
You know, I don't know the answer to that, Randy. I do think the individuals that got to participate in that camp benefited, because obviously there were a lot of minor league players that weren't able to do anything. So was their growth curve the same as if they were, you know, normally competing at high A or double A this year? Probably not. But I would also add that, you know, they did get a lot of individual coaching attention that maybe they wouldn't have gotten during a normal season. So I'm going to table that question till next spring when we actually see them again.
And the reason I ask that, because you mentioned the guys that are coming off the books, and it seems to dovetail, especially with guys like Gorman, Herrera, Montero, perhaps. It just seems like there's a lot of dovetailing into 2022 with what you have coming up.
Well, I'm certainly excited about that group, and I do think your math is right in terms of when to expect those types of contributions. So, you know, when you're looking at not over tying your hands too, so you can remain flexible for 2022, that does make sense as well. But that's not the driving force behind what we're thinking this offseason.
Are you worried about the minor leagues next year too? What that might look like, or what they'll be able to do or not do?
There's not a day goes by that I'm not worried about something, and yes, I'd have that on the list. I mean, I hope that like, I think everybody in baseball knows development for this group of players that didn't get any baseball this year is vitally important. So trying to come up with a different model on what that may or may not look like is something I think all major league teams are going to put their heads together this offseason.
Well, you talked about kind of needing to scale back because of a season without fans. How do you also balance that with trying to put a team together that excites fans and wants to get them in the ballpark if they are allowed to go after this kind of uncertainty about whether or not they should be getting together in groups and things of that nature?
So your question is how do we maintain excitement even though we're under some pandemic challenges, but still keep people engaged?
It's a unique spot. You want people to want to come to the ballpark and give them a reason to be fired up about an offense that has not been probably what you hoped it was the past couple of seasons. But you also don't know if they will be.
That's a very passive-aggressive way to say improve your offense. But anyway, let me answer your question.
I'm not trying to be passive-aggressive. I'm trying to acknowledge that you're having to make some financial restrictions due to not playing a season in front of fans.
We still have a very exciting core. We still have excellent starting pitching and depth in our bullpen. And we will certainly look at ways to either understand what our internal upgrades might look like. And as I've stated from the very beginning, we will certainly understand what these markets may look like. Like, I just don't know the answers to some of these questions today, but I hope our fan base will be excited about the product we put out there. You know, regardless of whether we get that approval or not, we're going to play next year, I hope, which is probably most important. But you know, certainly understanding what our fans like to see and want to see, something that we do think about. It's just hard to gather exactly what the group wants because there's a lot of people that complain about some things we do, and other people are very happy with things that we do. But ultimately, I hope people can get down to Busch Stadium next year because I hope the pandemic is somewhat in the rearview mirror and people can get back to some normalcy. That'd be my
Didn't
biggest
know-
hope of all.
You didn't know last year what it was going to look like until, I guess, after spring training was canceled. Would it behoove players and owners alike to come up with some sort of a plan for what 2021 looks like sooner, so there's some of these decisions can be made earlier?
Well, I think, people that sit in my seat, people that sit in Bill's seat are very much aware of these uncertainties. And I think everybody is trying to help decide or put together a plan that could help, bring some certainty to it. But unfortunately, there's so much you can control and so much you can't. And just balancing that out.
Hey Mo, before the 2013 playoff series against the Dodgers, and they had traded for all those monster contracts, Stan Kasten pointed to your dugout from their dugout and said, "That's our model. That's what we want to be." As you watch them during this series, with all the young kids that they supplemented with the veterans and obviously big money veterans, can you kind of see what he's talking about with the way that team was built?
Yeah, to some degree. I mean, remember, like when you look at their path to where they've gotten, they were ultra aggressive in the international market, and were willing to even take on some maybe dead money for prospects. So their economic model is just different than ours. But your overarching theme of having the ability to have homegrown talent is certainly something that has been our model from day one. And we've tried to augment talent wherever we can, but clearly we're not really starting both at first base. We're a little different on where the starting point is, but I certainly admire that the team they put together. Look, I thought the postseason was really fun to watch. I wish we were like a part of it longer. I thought the setup of sort of the bracketing format was kind of cool, and showing my baseball fan in me, I thought it was like entertaining.
Well, when you mentioned the COVID effects on certain players, is Lane Thomas fair to put in that group? I mean, he was out for a while and didn't always look like himself that we'd seen previously when he was back. I'm just curious how you thought maybe his interaction with the virus.
Yeah, I don't really want to go into like individual, like what that means to each one, but I will comment on him specifically. And the reason I'll comment on him specifically, because I was talking with our medical staff this morning about him, and he is definitely one of those players that was more affected. In other words, like when he came back, he struggled at times with breathing, and more he noted to the guys that like I felt dizzy at times, and so these are just things like we're all learning as we go, and I think when you're dealing with such healthy population of people that got infected, you didn't see like a lot of things you read about or hear about, but yet it had more of an effect than just simply, hey man, I feel good today. And it was behind them. And I think our medical staff is doing the best they can to learn from that and understand how to best treat it. But I think most importantly, you need sort of that transparency